Good evening, everybody. Shall we make a start as it's 7 o'clock and YouTube is now operational? So welcome. So this is the overview and scrutiny for services. If you go to your agenda, please. So agenda item 1, apologies for absence and substitution.
Thank you, Chairman. We've had apologies from Councillors Christine Baker, Sally Dixon and Michaela Wicks, and Councillor Joan Hegan is substituting tonight.
Thank you, very welcome, Joan. Okay, agenda item 2, minutes. This is to approve the minutes of the meeting of the Services Overview and Scrutiny Committee held on the 3rd of November 2021 and it's been published on the Council's website. Have anybody got any comments to make, or can I take them as approved? Councillor Else.
Well, they are approved, but there's a few things that I'd like to pick up on. So if you want me to do it now, well, if there's another time during the meeting that were promised and I don't think have happened.
I'd prefer to do it now so we don't forget it.
Okay, so and if this has happened, forgive me, and whoever's responsible, I'd like it again, please, but I don't think it has. An email was promised to all councillors, re what Continental have been doing whilst they haven't been mowing. I don't think I've seen that. So that's one thing I'd like to see. I think that was Kelvin. Do we know, can we find out whether the corporate strategy talks about mental health in particular? Apparently, officers said that they would investigate that and dig down deep how many references there were to mental health, because we feel that's quite important on the agenda for this ONS. Health and Wellbeing Board should be a standing item. That was the ONS officer's suggestion, I think. I'm not sure, but he supported that. So if we can attend to that particular thing, that would be good. The leisure management strategy, working with Guildford, tendering for a larger joint contract, that was going to be brought to this committee, this November committee, the outcome of that investigation. Can't read my own writing here. Categorisation and information re rural crime. Community Services Manager said that we would have further information on that. So there were 5 things to be carried over really from the minutes, and I didn't want to lose any of them. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, I'm just going through your list, and so the first one was about the mowing, which comes under Kelvin, so maybe Kelvin can pick that one up. Louise, maybe the mental health, how many times it's identified within the strategy. Wellbeing being a standing item, I think was your 3rd.
Yes.
The 4th was the collaboration.
Yes.
And that's in relation to the
Guildford Borough Council, in order to perhaps tender for larger joint contract. And that was being investigated, and there was going to be a report which was going to take about 5 weeks to bring to this November committee meeting.
Are you talking in relation to the leisure centres?
Yeah, sorry, leisure centres, sorry, leisure management strategy.
Leisure management, which there is mentioned within the report, but I'm sure Kelvin can come back to that as well in a second. I'll just go through the 5 points first and then Mark can jump in. And the last one was about rural crime.
Yes.
Okay, and what was the inquiry? Just to make sure there was a clarification on its recording, or?
Categorisation and information re rural crime. Somebody on our committee, and I can't remember who, asked a question about rural crime and the importance of the problem, the issue, and I think it might have been Sally Dixon. I'm not sure.
I think it was Councillor Rubini.
Was it Councillor Rubini? I'm sorry.
Raised it, yeah.
But I don't remember seeing anything about that. So I'm wondering if that's going to be something that we can expect quite soon.
Okay.
Thank you.
Mark, did you, I saw in my corner of my eye.
Were you planning to take them one at a time, or do you want me to jump in on the ones where I have?
Well, I saw your hand up, so you might
Okay.
have to go.
Okay, to say on, we've got a look at the leisure services contracts, a review of the options on that is on the forward programme for January. Okay. In terms of the health and well-being partnership, I'll defer to officers with more kind of direct exposure to it. My understanding is, having looked at it, it probably isn't going to produce updates regularly enough for it to work as a standing item. So it's probably more sensible to bring it on a case-by-case basis.
Thank you, Kelvin. Do you want to jump in?
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the reminder, councillors. I'll circulate the continental list of works, what they were doing, as opposed to my apologies for not doing that before.
Thank you, Louise.
And in relation to mental health, in the corporate strategy, there's an action to support the most vulnerable in our communities, particularly those experiencing social isolation, loneliness and poor mental health. And in the later item on the corporate strategy progress, there are some actions that we've carried out under that objective, but I can let you know more about that.
Okay, so we've made a note of those points. Anything else on the minutes? Okay. Declarations of interest, Fiona.
None received before the meeting, Chairman.
Questions by members of the public
None received.
and questions from members. Excellent. Okay, so we go to item number 6, which is the committee forward work programme. I have to admit, I do have some concerns when I look at this document. Firstly, by the sheer quantity of it, looking at January, we've got 10 or 11 items already on it, which is just not doable. And if you have that many items on it, you don't actually scrutinise any of them. And the second point I am concerned about is which items we're being asked to scrutinise, as part of our role is to look at the items to be scrutinised, identify them, and then ask them to be scrutinised. So it should be more led by this committee. I appreciate this is the first meeting, Mark, and it's trying to merge all the various overview and scrutinies into one, and there'll be things, hopefully they won't be dropped, but we could miss out. So I have got concerns, and I know there's a couple of items from the housing minutes, which I think they're concerned it hasn't come to us at all. So I think we need to go through the list, but I don't think this is a list that we necessarily be working to, but we've got to have a starting point. So if you would lead us through that, Mark, and then I'll open it up, and then please, members, give your views on what should, what shouldn't. The other thing I have had a very quick conversation with Mark about is the flow chart for what should go to scrutiny. I'm sure you see it, yes and a no, and depending on what your answer is, I think we need to see how future items have gone through that process. That so shows that they should come to the scrutiny. So over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, just to say, there was an update of the work programme published, which went out after, that only became available after the copy went out by post, but there should be a hard copy on your desk if you want to refer to that. In terms of the actions, part 1 and the recommendations made at meeting earlier in this month, the portfolio holder circulated an email with the executive's response to those items, and I would suggest you append those to the minutes as to kind of to recognise that response kind of formally and in public. I would then, in terms of the part 3, the upcoming items, as the chair indicated, it is quite a substantive list. This is basically everything from, well, hopefully everything. That was the aspiration. Everything from the previous 4 committees that would fall under the remit of this committee. So it is quite a long list, and it's probably worth more seeing as a list to take options from than as a comprehensive work programme, because I don't think at the current form it would be particularly deliverable, or at least not deliverable in a way that gives sufficient time to each item. I would suggest as an early kind of way of maybe freeing up some time, looking at, we've had that housing ONS used to get standing updates on the asset management and housing development updates. I would suggest either dropping those or moving them to be annual, because they are, this committee has less of a kind of laser focus on housing, obviously, than housing ONS did. Those don't tend to be areas that move particularly quickly. You're not likely to see fundamental changes from one committee cycle to the next. And obviously, Landlord Services Board, they will get looked at, obviously not formally scrutinised, but looked at in that context. So I'd suggest that as being an early way to see, an early way of reducing the number of items at each meeting. Otherwise, I think it'd be interesting to hear what your priorities are, and if that, and I guess as importantly, any depriorities, if that's a word.
Okay, I'll come to you 2 seconds, Cal. Additionally, myself and the Vice Chair have had a conversation with the policy ONS, because it's felt that probably the work balance is a bit skewed at the moment, and there's quite a few strategies that seem to be coming to us where I would say strategies are policy. And is policy the best title anyway? So we are having a conversation to see whether we can balance some of this workload, because otherwise we're going to end up not scrutinising big chunks of it. Carol, you had your hand up.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I mean, as it stands, as you've already said, this is completely unworkable. I mean, there's absolutely no way we can attempt all of that in one meeting and actually do anything useful. I would say, before we get into the detail, I would say looking at certain words, receiving the results does not have to be done necessarily at an ONS meeting. You know, you can receive the results, but you can have a short time to question, if you want, the portfolio holder or the officer responsible. So there's 1 or 2 words here which I think suggest that the matter will not necessarily be scrutinised. You know, updates, you don't need a presentation, you can get those in written form and as I say, tease out anything else you need. So I think the structure's got to be looked at. But I mean, just looking at it, it's just so totally unworkable. You know, even on the previous structure, if you had too many things on one agenda, you really couldn't do it justice. The strategy is a difficult one, isn't it? Because certain strategies, you know, there is such a connection towards, let's say in the planning, you know, towards service, you know, you feel you want some input into that, but I take your point that it's probably more policy, but policy is not a particularly good name for any committee, I wouldn't have thought. I'm sure there's a better name that would sort of broadly cover that. So, you know, basically, I almost feel we got to put this back to the drawing board and really sit down and work out, because otherwise we're just going to have impossible agendas. We're not going to do any scrutiny, and you know, it's going to be just not a very successful committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. In some ways, the work we do is looking externally, and policy really is almost the internal side of the business, possibly. But I totally agree. I'll take some more views, and then maybe we'll see whether we make a decision whether we need to take this away and work on it as a group, as a committee, pull in all the 4 previous ONSs so we can make sure we don't drop anything, and whether that's a better way of doing it rather than trying to do it in this meeting. Louise.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just make the point that the name of policy, I don't think there was any intention for it to be regarded as a place to sort of look at policy in, in strategies in policy, and not for if there was a relevant strategy to come to your committee. So I totally agree. The name is potentially misleading. And I think that policy ONS is more looking at resources and the sort of the internal sort of, whether that's people resources, money resources, that sort of assets and that sort of thing. So I think it's misleading. I just wanted to clear that up. Thank you.
Any other views around the table? Do people, would people rather take this away rather than trying to go through each item one by one? Some volunteers to go through that process? Ruth?
I'm not volunteering. I'm just saying, well, surely, no, surely we could just discuss the priorities that this committee think, and then work through those. I don't see there's a big problem.
No, there isn't a big problem, but if we leave it as it is, with 10 or 11 items already on the list for next January's, we would be here all day and all night. So it's guessing what are the items we really should be scrutinising. And the points that Carol made earlier, some of these aren't actually scrutiny items. They're just noting or looking at the policy. Carol, did you want to come back?
Well, I would just rather sort of do a Zoom meeting, amongst the committee, whoever wants to be a part of it, and just, thrash this out between us. As you say, we've got quite a heavy agenda anyway, and I think it could take some time. And I think we should do it properly if we're going to set off on this new path. So I would personally, have a Zoom at some point and all of us put our 2 pence in and see what we come up with.
Okay, thank you for that. Mark, if we can, between you and Louise, arrange that. And we'll do it on Zoom, there's no need to do it in person. And if you could circulate the 4 original ONS's work programmes, so we have all of the 4, and then we can just make sure where they sit, and then make our priority list of what we have then in front of us. Okay, so if everybody's happy, we'll move on from that topic for the time being. Corporate performance report. The heads of service are going to outline their sections. Now, I know some of the documents, the printing has lobbed off all the page numbers. So I think that proves to Councillor Hyman, it's not just to him that it happens. It happens to us all, because I can't tell which pages are which on mine. I've lost the bottom of a lot of mine. Who's going to go first? Kelvin, would you like to?
Chair, if I could just do a quick introduction to the report. So we are looking at the second quarter for 2021-22, covering the period from the 1st of July to 30th of September. As you've mentioned, there was a change of the committee structure. So 5 of the customer-facing services will be coming, the performance scrutiny will be coming to this committee. So we'll be looking at the commercial services, environmental services, housing delivery and communities, housing operations and planning as well. As you mentioned, it is customary for each of the head of service to take the committee through their specific dashboards. And this is what's going to happen this evening as well. We have a couple of apologies from the officers. Our head of operations, Hugh Wagstaff, is unable to attend this evening, and in his place, we're going to have Annalisa Housen coming in and kind of taking you through the housing operations dashboard. And also apologies from Zach Elwood, our head of planning, and in his place, we're going to have our strategic director, Graham Clark, taking away any questions that the members may have. So that's all from me, and we're going to be starting, for anyone who can see the pages, with the commercial services section. It's kind of in the middle of the report. So it's page 38 of the agenda, or page 20 of the actual report, which is the page of the report is at the very kind of end. The pages of the agenda are in the middle. That's all from me, and I'll pass on to Kelvin. Thank you.
Thank you, Nora. My apologies, I couldn't see you on the screen, so but it was pointed out. Kelvin, you might just have to help us with some of the pages because I've lost the page numbers of, I think, one of the two. I've got page on the right-hand side of each page, but the one in the middle is completely gone. It's just a blur. So if you can refer to the one on the right, so page 21. Okay, so hopefully we'll all be where it says page 21. Thank you, Kelvin.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I've got page 21 to 2024. So I'll do a brief introduction. Obviously, everything's there. I can answer any questions. I've started every quarterly report with it's been an extremely busy quarter. This continued to be that. However, what was pleasing during this quarter was the external recognition that the Parks and Countryside team received. We were successful in achieving 10 green flags for areas around the borough, as well as Farnham Park being recognised for a heritage award, which is, I think, great external recognition for what has been an extremely tough first couple of quarters and hard work for that team. So I'm really pleased to be able to report that. I'm less pleased, but it is still an award. We have 2 platinum awards for Lose of the Year. Broadwater's, that's its 3rd successive award. I'm unsure about how Frensham won, but it did seem to win an award. So that's another one we'll celebrate. I'll take anything. One of the other positives was the usage of the leisure centres. So we've seen over 90,000 increase in usage this quarter, and I'm pleased to say that's continuing throughout this current quarter as well. So members of the public are feeling safe and are returning to use the leisure centres, which is great to see. Building control, Careline and Wavy train services all continue to operate well and achieve the KPIs. One thing I would just point out with building control, we are seeing a slowing of applications at the moment. I think that's just a reflection of the construction industry and the planning delays in the area. So if we go on to the KPIs, they're all strong, although the leisure centre is red. Like I say, to see an increase of 90,000, over 90,000 this quarter, I think is still really positive. And then finally, the favourable financial position is largely down to that improved performance of the leisure centres against forecast, which is why it's showing against budget a positive, favourable position. I think that was it, Chair. I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay, questions from the floor? Carol.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I just wondered, Kevin, if all this sort of fuss over the parking at the leisure centre, certainly in Farnham, has come your way. Because I think I must get a phone call every day or an email. And it's really the sort of special class uses that are just finding it impossible to get going again. So, you know, sort of, I'm trying to think what the last one was that he was, but I think look it up. You know, there just seems to be a feeling that, you know, this blanket rise is really harmful to certain groups, you know, specialist groups. And if there was some way we could work something out, you know, and because I know in other places they do sort of slightly, I don't know whether they give them back, I don't know how, you know, different things, tokens, whatever. But I just wondered if that was having an impact on 1 or 2 of these rather specialist groups coming back, or whether it's not been noticeable at all. I just seem to get an awful lot of emails at the moment about it.
Thank you, Councillor Cohen. Yeah, I have received correspondence regarding the impact of the car park rises on certain groups, and working with my colleague Richard, who's on the screen there. We've offered passes to specialist swimming groups. So 2 specific groups have already received passes for free parking, and then Richard and I, with the car parking team, we're working through options to see how we can alleviate the impact of the rises, and that could be through suggestions such as you've made, but there are also other options that we're looking at to see how we can not impact the users of the leisure centre, but whilst not having it flooded with people parking there for other uses. So we are looking at that. So Richard and I will be working through that.
Okay, just one observation rather than one other question. The total number of Careline clients, I see we're over 100 down from this quarter to the same quarter last year, which in some ways I would have expected to have gone up with COVID and people's concern and everything else. And I just wondered if there was something we're missing there, either with our communication or the way that we reach these people.
Thank you, Chair. And I think that's a fair observation. I'm looking at it with the team to see how we can improve our communications. What we're generally finding is there's still a nervousness with that sort of group of vulnerable adults, and we're not getting a number of referrals through that we were pre-pandemic. So we are going to work with Surrey County Council and increase referrals. So the team and I are looking at that. Hopefully we'll see improved uptake over the coming quarters.
Okay, any further comments from members? Councillor Townsend.
Thank you, Chair. Following on from your comment about the clients reducing in number, the actual calls have gone up quite noticeably over the same period of time. Are you able to sort of indicate to us the 3 top reasons why people are calling? Because it looks like every person is calling certainly every month. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Townsend. I won't be able to give the specific details, but I can share it with the committee. A lot of those, they are tested regularly, so that will record some tests. But I'll come back, if you don't mind, with that detail for you, just to see what the usage are.
Thank you. You can add it to your list on your email. Just keep adding to it. Anything else from Kelvin? If not, Andrew, are you going to go next?
Thank you, Chairman. I think we're either page 30 or page 34, depending, for the Housing Delivery and Communities section of the Corporate Performance Report. Just 1 or 2 things to highlight, running through the narrative for you. We've now launched the Thriving Communities Commissioning Fund scheme, which will allow organisations throughout the borough to apply for funding from the pot. We are sort of targeting specific areas now, and for those particular organisations will be commissioned to deliver a service. Would like to record our thanks to the working group from the Community Wellbeing ONS that worked very hard with us over a number of months to sort out, which was quite a difficult issue. So the scheme is launched, the bids are in, and the panel will meet in due course to decide on the funding. I accept that this runs to the 30th of September, but I thought the committee would just like that update. Also in communities, long-term antisocial behaviour, complex neighbourhood disputes is taking a phenomenal amount of our time. We do have the services of a highly experienced ASB officer with us, funded from money we've had because of the pandemic. He's with us till March, and he's made a great difference in sorting out some of these issues that have gone on for months and even years. So that is something that I think we are addressing and need resources to do so. Moving on to housing, really just to highlight the housing strategy, now called the Affordable Homes Delivery Strategy, which I hope this committee will scrutinise, as it really is an outfacing, well, it's outfacing in more ways than one, but it faces outwards in terms of delivering affordable homes in the borough. It only deals with affordable housing delivery. Previous housing strategies have looked at homelessness and other things. They will come in separate strategies and documents. There is a member briefing on the 7th of December, if I can do an advert for that, where we will have a couple of consultants with us who have done work for us on affordability and viability, so that we can actually shape the kinds of homes and the types of homes we need in the borough to meet the needs, particularly of lower and middle income households. Moving on to homelessness, the team continue to prevent homelessness extremely effectively, with never more than 2 to 3 households in temporary accommodation at any one time. We were able to deliver a couple of modular units in Farncombe for homeless single people, and they are now occupied. We were successful in government funding the Rough Sleeper Initiative. We were able to fund a worker who is now providing support to rough sleepers and those who particularly have long-term homelessness issues. And that really, Chairman, those things I just wanted to highlight. Very happy, of course, to take any questions from committee.
Any questions? Councillor Wells.
Thank you, Chairman. It's not really a question, but it's something I'd like to know about. In my ward, I have a housing association which provides homes and for people who are vulnerable. And I just would like to know to what extent Waverley can become involved with the housing association's acceptable management of their homes, and to what extent they can't, because I do realise they're a separate organisation altogether, but we do pass people on to them, don't we? And so we do have quite a few issues in my ward, and I'm sure I'm not alone across the borough. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Else. Yes, there is a sort of a maxim that says that landlord and tenant, that's the relationship, and the landlord needs to sort out issues with tenants. But we do have a fair amount of leverage with housing association partners. And so if tenants are complaining to us about their landlord, and if local councillors are concerned that homes aren't being managed, then we have contacts in those housing associations. We can go to senior management, whereas the tenants clearly would only have a relationship with a local officer. Sometimes the most weight can be given by councillors writing to senior officers in the housing association, or even board members. So if there are those issues, and I'd be very happy to speak to you, Councillor Else, about the specifics, we can work together on it. And that would go for any member who has concerns about housing management with housing association partners.
Councillor Reid.
That is exactly what I've done and worked very successfully with their senior people. May I just ask about something in environmental? This is to Richard Homewood. Richard, I wonder if you could...
Sorry, can we wait till we get to that section?
Oh, sorry, but we're not going logically through. That's...
I think we're up to page 36 was, I think, where you finished, Andrew, and then the next section is housing operations. Unless I've got this. Did we? Page 25. Right, page 25. Thank you, Councillor Reid. Councillor Reid, we'll go to that now, because obviously we skipped over it and I've got the right page. So thank you, if you'd like to continue.
So I was right. Thank you. I just wanted, because of the COVID pandemic, obviously we couldn't have environmental health going into facilities that provided food. I wonder if and when that will recommence, please, Richard.
Mr. Homewood.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Well, in actual fact, the Environmental Health Service did continue to work with businesses throughout the pandemic. They didn't stop visiting premises, but very much their work was focused on supporting businesses and advising businesses on how to adapt to mitigate any risk of infection through COVID. So there were a lot more demands for their advice for home catering. Lots of businesses diversified into home catering and that sort of thing, and the team were under significant pressure to support and advise businesses throughout COVID. There is a backlog of food hygiene inspections now, and they're working with the Food Standards Agency, who've helped us with extra resources through the COVID funding to bring in some extra environmental health people to catch up on the backlog of food safety inspections. But all of the high-risk food premises were visited during the COVID outbreak, right from March 2020. So the work didn't actually stop. The staff were given extra PPE, personal protective equipment, and advised on how to work with businesses safely during that period. So it wasn't a complete stop of the work, and we are pleased to say that the majority of businesses have maintained standards during the outbreak.
Thank you very much, Mr. Homewood, and I'm very pleased to hear that, because it was so important. People are having so many takeaways from these establishments. So I really appreciate that. Thank you. What could we move on to now, Chair, please? What are we allowed to move on to?
Well, no, I think
there?
Mr. Homewood's got to give his update. If you've got an update on your performance, I've got a couple of other questions on fly tipping, etc.
Thank you, Chair. Just very briefly to run through my report there. Obviously, in terms of waste management and environmental enforcement, the work has had to continue, and the impact of COVID has been very significant on the performance of the waste services. Our contractors worked extremely hard with us to maintain services. And in actual fact, we have continued to provide most services, whereas some local authorities around us and further afield have had to suspend part, if not all, of their services for various periods. That is against a backdrop of increased tonnages of waste being produced at home because people are staying at home, self-isolating or working from home. So more waste is coming out of domestic premises rather than commercial premises at the moment still. You'll have seen the regular updates from Nick Baker and myself about the pressures on Biffa at the moment, and certainly today they are under significant pressure with up to 15 members of staff off sick with COVID or suspected COVID or other general flu and other issues. So huge pressure on the waste service. We are doing a lot of communications exercises around that to inform members, but also to inform the public through social media, the website, etc. Just to ask the public to be supportive during this period and leave their bins out until they can be collected. It's what we don't need is tens of thousands of calls to the switchboard saying that my bin's not been collected. The advice is leave it out. They will get to it as soon as they can, but they are under significant pressure. And we have to thank Biffa and the workers on the ground, especially for what they've done during the COVID outbreak period, because it's been extremely hard and exhausting work for them. And they have maintained almost a perfect service throughout the period. On the parking side, we've had the parking review and the increase in parking charges. And certainly that's raised one or two issues, but nothing that's insurmountable. And we're working through those. But generally, the reaction from the public hasn't been too bad, and certainly it's bedding in nicely. As said already, the environmental health team are now focusing, and the licensing team, on catching up on outstanding inspections and working with businesses to try and get back to business as usual, both for themselves and for the businesses they're working with. And as I said, we have got some additional funding through the COVID funding from the government to bring in some additional resources to help catch up on that work. We have had a few nasty accidents recently that are under investigation by the food and the health and safety team, and a few poorly performing food businesses. So not all of them maintain standards, and we're dealing with them as well. Then we've got two licensing policy reviews that have been undertaken during the quarter this report refers to, the gambling policy review and the sex establishment review. They've both been carried out now. The final versions of those policies are now being prepared to go back to licensing committee and then on to the council for approval. The pollution team has been involved in a number of complex nuisance cases, some around odour nuisance, some around noise nuisance, which take up an awful lot of officer time preparing files for court and that sort of thing. So an awful lot of work going on. And again, people staying at home and working from home has given rise to a slight increase in the number of neighbour nuisance type complaints. The Carbon Neutrality Action Plan team, the sustainability team, are working hard with other departments to secure progress with the Carbon Neutrality Action Plan. Things like electric vehicle charging, cycle shelters, cycle greenways, and work is underway to investigate the use of photovoltaic arrays on our larger buildings and a feasibility study into a solar farm. So lots of work going on to try to deliver the Carbon Neutrality Action Plan as far as we can and make significant progress on it. And I just have to thank all the staff in the teams for keeping business as usual going as much as they could during COVID. And certainly they need now to take a deep breath and focus on getting back to business as usual. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Councillor Wells, I believe you had your hand up, and then Councillor Wojciechowski. Councillor Wojciechowski.
Thank you, Chairman. Forgive me because I think I missed my cue on an earlier item, if I can just address it, because I think this is a feel-good story here. So, and I'd really like to thank Andrew and his team and everyone involved, because I think the Thriving Communities Commissioning Scheme is a great idea, and at a time when resources are so stretched and there's a lot of uncertainty and there's a lot of people out there desperately wanting to know where their next penny is going to come from and where grants are available. I think this is a real initiative for those who want to do something, and there is some help in the background. So I think that's worth mentioning, because with resources being as stretched as they are, that's a real, for me, a good feel factor. And I know certainly someone who I've put in touch who would greatly benefit for the work that they do in the community. So thank you and your team. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for raising that. It's a point well made. Councillor Marriott.
Thank you, Chair. Richard, you made a comment about work underway to investigate the feasibility of arrays on some of the larger buildings. What does the feasibility study include? Is it just the sort of engineering aspects, or are you looking at it from a sort of business perspective? Well, it's under the carbon neutrality action plan, but I mean, are you looking at the justification for how you decide whether it's worth doing or not from that aspect, as well as from the economic aspect?
Yes, it's a combination of all of those. It's firstly looking at what buildings we've got, the practicalities of installing PV arrays on them, and then looking at the cost versus the income potential from them to see if they're financially viable as well as physically possible. So it's looking at all aspects of the opportunities for introducing income generation and reducing our carbon footprint. So it's an all-embracing review at this stage.
Okay, thank you. I've just got one observation, which is the average number of days to remove a fly tipping, which 3 days, 4 days. I just think when you've got rubbish at the side of a road, it doesn't look good, and that, I think that's far too long. So I'm sure you can give that some thought before our next meeting, how we can reduce that. I think the target's 2 days, and we've only met that once in 1, 2, 3, 5 quarters.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Obviously, the people that clear the fly tips are the same people that are struggling to maintain our refuse collection services. They're not a separate crew of people. And it's a delicate balancing act whether you pull them off picking up people's refuse bins and recycling bins, or leave the fly tip for another day. And I accept what you say, and that's why our target is 2 days. And we will do our best to get back to that target as soon as we can. But with the level of staffing they've got at the moment, I can't guarantee it will be back to 2 days in the next quarter.
I will reiterate the compliments that Councillor Mary Wojciechowski has made. I'd like to compliment Richard Homewood's team, because every time I have made a comment about fly tipping, that has been cleared well within 2 days, and particularly from the 2 car parks in Cranny, both Village Way and Stockton Square. And I know they've been under great pressure, and I'd like to thank you and the team at BIFA. Thank you.
Okay, I think that's that section. By my reckoning, we should be to page 37. So, which is housing operations. I presume that's Mr. Oh.
Good evening. Yes, so you're page 37, section 10, if that helps anybody. So I was just going to give you a brief overview of what the housing team did last summer. Seems a long time ago now, but this report, as Nora said, is Q2. So we've continued to work post-lockdown, trying to make sure we're managing our services, with the ongoing pandemic to make sure we're supporting tenants and maintaining good quality homes. So we've had a changing of the guard over the summer. Some of you may know one of our housing officers, James Dodu, who was with us for 18 years, worked a lot in Farnham. He's taken a well-earned retirement, and we've been really successful with replacing him with a new member of staff who was, you may have seen her on the, she was in the photos of the Pride Parade, and she's also been a customer services officer with us before, so her face is out there. And we also sent an introduction letter to all her tenants to let them know that she was their new housing officer. And that was lovely because that was a suggestion from our tenants panel AGM, and that was something we were able to follow up with quite quickly. Other successes in the quarter, we gained some funding from the Contain Outbreak Management Fund, which is giving us additional support services to help people following the pandemic. So we've got some additional floating support officers. As Richard said, because people have been home for a long time, there has been an increase in neighbour nuisance, and people are feeling quite stressed and not necessarily been as neighbourly as they may have been in the past. We've also increased our communal cleaning, so we're making sure that high touch points continue to be clean as the pandemic continues. And also we've given additional resources to Mediation Surrey, who are a really good resource. Anybody can refer themselves, any councillor can refer people. You don't need both parties to get involved. They will work with one person to help them deal with the situation they're facing. So really good service if you were interested in that. Two areas where we've really worked hard to rectify issues. We've engaged with Surrey Fire and Rescue Service following a notice at one of our senior living schemes. It was something that we were aware of. We did a joint inspection with the fire service, and they did issue with us with an enforcement notice. We've got a plan in action. We've got safety wardens in the scheme 24/7 to make sure that if there is a fire, everybody can get out safely. And works have started on removing some of the wood panelling and compartmentalisation, big word for this time of the evening, to make sure that residents are safe in their homes. Really pleased that the work has been completed at another senior living scheme where members may have been aware that we had a Legionella outbreak, and that took quite a long time as we investigated, tried option A, tried option B, worked through until we're very pleased that that work's now been completed, and the testing that's completed since the works have been completed are all clear. So I'd really like to thank Tim Tyler for managing that project and getting that successful solution. Members will also be aware that we've done some preliminary work, which meant that the executive pledges and plans have been enacted to support Afghan refugees through the Home Office resettlement programme. And finally, really was a delight to celebrate with the tenants panel of their 25+1 anniversary. We were unable to celebrate, as lots of big celebrations got put off last year, so it was really lovely to have our 25+1 anniversary with them at the Tilford Rural Life Centre, and I'm pleased to see that our homes are better than some of the prefabs that they've got in the centre. And also we published our summer edition of the tenants newsletter, so hopefully all members saw that, and that's a good indication of what we're doing, how we're working with residents, and how we're progressing. I'm happy to take questions.
Questions from members? Councillor Else.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wonder why responsive repairs, the monitoring has been suspended until April 2022. I'd just like to know that, because if it's that we aren't meeting any targets, whatever, we still like to know about it. If it's really, really bad, we still should know about it. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. We're just not collecting that information in that way at the moment. What happened was we went through a procurement process, we got a new contractor in place. At that time, we had an independent market research company contacting tenants after a responsive repair had been completed. unfortunately, what happened was that responsive repair contractor left us, and at the moment we have an interim contractor. So we were unable to continue with that intensive satisfaction survey with residents. However, you do have something else instead within, which we're not making, but we do have other indicators to show how the responsive repair service is working. Responsive repairs is a huge area for us to get right. It's tremendously difficult for us to get right. You may have noticed in the commentary, we're going through procurement process. We're hoping, well, no, we will next month be announcing on a new longer term responsive repairs contractor who will be able to work with very effectively, and we will then reintroduce the tenant satisfaction survey rather than the did the operative say he turned up at what time. We can do that.
Councillor Reid.
On the same subject, Chair, I'm just thinking maybe this is the reason why reletting voids is a problem, because we haven't got the manpower maybe to go in and see to these homes, perhaps.
Yes, so during the pandemic, we were unable to let homes for I think 3-4 month period. So we've had a backlog. We had a backlog from the pandemic, and we had a backlog because of the poor performance of the first contractor. So we were really up against it. We're getting through the backlog, but now we're getting more voice than we've had in previous years. So we're constantly working hard. We are seeing improvements in that, and we've taken a number of initiatives to speed up the reletting process, one of which is doing virtual viewings, which is going really well, because it's stopping us duplicating time. We're not taking somebody to a property and then they say they're not interested. They're viewing it on their phone and then saying no. So we're getting through people who potentially shouldn't have been a bit quicker. But you're right about the operatives. I think anybody who's tried to get any home improvements done over the last year will know that it's been very challenging, and it's going to continue to be challenging for the immediate future. But we're working really hard with the contractors, and they are actively recruiting.
Thank you very much for that. So if we can move on, we should be under section 11 now, which is planning and economic development, which should be pages 42 to 47. I think it's Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, so Zach apologises. Zach isn't very well this week, I'm afraid. So Chairman, I'll just run you through some of the headlines and then throw it open to questions. Sally Busby, our Planning Business and Performance Manager, has also kindly joined the call. And I'm going to ask Sally just to update on some of the data, because what we're looking at here is Q2, and in development control, Q2, there are some obvious concerns in the performance. So as we're now sort of almost 2 months into Q3, I want Sally just to bring some of those numbers up to date. So Chairman, at the start of the section for planning economic development, so page 42 into page 43, just a reminder that Zach has 4 main areas under his remit. I'll do them in reverse order and just touch on a couple of points. So economic development first. Actually, in Q2, Calvin Mills kindly looked after economic development to release a bit of pressure on Zach and the planning service while they implemented a lot of change. So thank you to Calvin and Debbie for that. They had a very busy quarter supporting businesses and working with various organisations, including the chambers. There are a lot of businesses out there with a sort of a long COVID impact that are still struggling. And so one of the ways that the economic development team have supported them is through our additional restrictions grant, which is a discretionary scheme funded by government, where we can target some resources to those businesses still impacting that haven't fully recovered yet. Planning policy, just working up through the list, extremely busy quarter for those. Members will all be aware about Local Plan Part 2 from the September Council meeting. So a lot of work there to put that out to a further consultation. That will be coming back in to a special overview and scrutiny committee on Monday the 13th, and then through to exec and council after that, with a view to submitting that to the inspector before Christmas. And that will be a major achievement, and well done to everybody in the team, particularly as there have also been a lot of activity on neighbourhood plans and indeed the all-important 5-year housing land supply evidence base as well. So Zach singled out some of those achievements from that team. Enforcement is another area that Zach has, planning enforcement. You'll see from Zach's commentary, again, there's always a lot of activity for that team in Waverley. So well done to them. And finally, on development management, this is the area of Zach's functions that has undergone some significant change in Q1 and Q2, actually. And that sort of coupled with a number of factors that Zach's listed, I won't go through them all, but including some resource challenges. We talked to a lot of other local authorities and their planning teams, not just in Surrey, but beyond, some real recruitment and retention challenges at the moment because the market is very strong. Hence the significant increase in planning applications compared to previous year and indeed the pre-pandemic year as well. So some real challenges there, and that combined with putting in a new system that in the long term will be a real benefit to us, has put a huge amount of pressure on the team. So again, well done to all the team there, and Sally's been an excellent new appointment to help at the sort of business and performance end. I'm not going to go into huge amounts of detail on the PI's chairman because members would have looked at those, and I'd rather leave the time for some questions. But I wonder if I could just ask Sally maybe just to update on a couple of the sort of key figures around backlogs and current processing times, Chairman. Would that be okay?
Yes, thank you for that, Graham. Good evening, Sally. Over to you.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good evening, sorry. Thank you very much. Yes, thank you, Graham. Just to touch on a couple of bits, if I may. So obviously the results that you're looking at in that quarter are sort of culminated of the previous 12 to 18 months effect. Broken eggs, but making an omelette is definitely most of the way through the process right now. The recovery plan was generated at the beginning of 2021, but in reality, it didn't really take much traction until May, June of 2021. Internally, we are starting to see that make tracks, as Graham has alluded to. We've now actively researched and are working with an outsourcing team in terms of the validation processing. On the basis of that, we went from a 600 backlog on validations, and we're now in the 400 mark, actually 404 to be precise, based on 604 backlog with 60 to 80 applications being received every week. We're making significant headway in getting that resolved. The validated cases on a householder, for example, are being determined much quicker. In the last 3 weeks, we had 85 cases that are actually passed through for sign off to development lead. So the officers are working on a much slicker basis. We've now implemented a more streamlined report in terms of householder applications, so we can journey it through much quicker. We've also built internally a new customer relations management system. What that's going to do is facilitate the customer service centre and the officers and offer a much better communication to both councillors and customers alike. So we're going to be able to journey and answer the questions, alleviate any frustrations of people in terms of what the information that they're looking for in the process on the journey of the life of their application. The Horizon system is now working. It's an end-to-end programme, although we're still developing with the finer points. There's still a few snags that we're working on in the next couple of months. We are actively building a glossary of processes and new procedures that will be rolling out across the service so that we have a slicker, more streamlined application for the customers to view, so that there shouldn't be any confusion at the stages and that we can deliver a more common message. We have the 3 DMs, the 3 development leads within the development management department right now are working along with all of the principals and delegated resource we have within the team to ensure that we work on the backlog of sign-offs. But we are definitely making progress, and the reports are, I believe, in the future are going to start reflecting what we are seeing internally. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Graham.
Chairman, would you mind if I just said a couple of just closing remarks before we throw it open? And one of those is about engagement. And we held a really important session with the planning agents last week, and they account for quite a lot of the householder and some of the larger applications as well. And we had 25 of them join us in the chamber and on Zoom. Really useful session, some good feedback, a lot of understanding, a bit of frustration as well. So that was good. And also Zach and Sally have been out sort of on the road talking to town and parish councils, and that engagement is really important because you know, that's about sort of building the trust and confidence in the service. So thank you, Chairman. I'll leave it there, and Sally and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. I look forward to seeing the improvements. I have to admit, I was quite concerning when I saw how many red flags there are on this. I looked at KPI P153, which was the processing of planning applications, non-major applications, and we've gone down from 90% in Q1 to 23% in Q2, which was a worrying trend. And going down that page, which is page 44, we've got 3 greens, but we've actually got 6 reds. So I think this would probably be one of the sections in the future. We really do need to start looking, because some of those figures are quite concerning. Performance indicator P2, which is the processing all other residential applications, we've gone down from 80% in Q4, 62 in Q1, down to 37. So quite drastic reductions in performance. So I have to admit, I have some concerns. I'm sure my colleagues have as well. Plans are great, results are better. You know, so, but I'll throw it open to my colleagues for questions. Councillor Coburn.
Thank you, Chairman. Not really sure it's a question, really. Can't remember how many meetings ago, Mr. Elwood said very clearly that enforcement was a decision for us, in the sense that the council could decide what importance it should give to enforcement as in its role as part of planning. And certainly, you know, I have no argument with the officers for enforcement. They're very prompt when they come out. My argument is really that we don't seem to take very strong action. You know, it seems to take an inordinate length of time to get something through. We have the monstrosity in the Bourne, which, you know, is becoming legendary now. And we just seem to bend over backwards, to be very, very fair to the person who's actually just not done what they're supposed to do. And I do really hope that we can put the resources into enforcement and actually make a point, because I've said before, I think enforcement's a bit like parenting. You know, you make the point early on, and then you can relax a bit and your children bring themselves up, really, you know. And I think with enforcement, it's a very frustrating service at the moment, both from my point of view, but more importantly from the residents' point of view. Just the slowness of it and the way it always seems to want to accommodate the wrongdoer. But my worry of the moment, my real worry, is what's said about local plan part 2. With the consultation ended, as we know, on the 12th of November, and it says here very clearly that we're still on track. I mean, that rather presupposes that nobody said anything interesting in the consultation responses. So if somebody could just explain to me when we're going to get this, because the last thing we want is this to be so rushed that we don't see any of it. And then all of a sudden we have something that seems to be a bit unsuitable coming into an ONS, you know, and then immediately into an executive and then into a council. I'm just a little bit worried about the sort of predetermination almost here of the outcome of that consultation. So if somebody could just explain to me I am a little bit worried too about the cost of all this, but that's probably for another day. So if Graham Clark could just give me a little bit of reassurance, that would be great.
Thank you for that.
Sorry.
And I'll come back maybe on the enforcement side, but over to you, Mr. Clark.
Well, Chairman, I can cover both actually of Councillor Coburn's point. So on the enforcement side, you'll notice in the forward programme for this committee, there is an enforcement plan. And I think, well, Zach's got one in draft at the moment that the enforcement team have written. It's the current one is a few years old. I think it's still sort of hanging in there and it needed a revision. I think that would be the opportunity for this committee to input to getting the balance right, because it is a balance often with enforcement, and you know the team really are looking forward to hearing from councillors as to what you think they should be focusing on, and that will come through to you. It's in the plan for January, and I've also asked that in the covering report there's some commentary about the activity of the team as well. So it's not just the plan, it's telling members what the team do and how they do it. So I think that would be useful. On the local plan part 2 report, that will be published next Friday ahead of the Monday the 13th. So it will have the full report with the annexes, will have the full required number of days for publication. And then at the moment, the Executive and Council is scheduled for the day after the ONS. But there will be, there should be sufficient time between publishing and the Overview and Scrutiny Committee for members to read, digest and the reports and to ask officers any questions they have. Chairman, thank you.
Thank you. For my 2 pennies worth on enforcement, I do find they're a very hard-working team, but I would agree. Sometimes I think they lack a bit of teeth. I've had several communities near where I am have built roads and chopped down trees, and by the time we've got anything done, the area's been destroyed, and then they put an application in to delay it even further. So I would agree, sometimes it feels a little bit toothless, but they are hard-working and they're always professional. Any other questions? Councillor Else, I think you were first.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm not sure I was following what Graham was saying at all, really. We've got to decide something about enforcement. I thought enforcement was a matter of planning law, but I could have misunderstood you. I know certainly when I heard Zach say what he said about councillors having to tell him where we wanted resources directed to, that was what I understood him to say. I don't see how we can do that because enforcement is a matter of planning law. And if we don't have enough resources to implement that, then we are at fault, and that's quite a grave situation to find ourselves in. And that, I think, is why we do find ourselves in that. However, point I just wanted to make was on P153A, I just wanted to ask, please, 5%. I don't know what that means because there's no target. Who decided it would be data only? At what point would that be decided? I'm interested in the process here. I've said this before in an ONS, the targets were always set by councillors. Have councillors set these targets? How have they come about? Who's decided them, and who decided to take the target away and make it data only? I'm particularly interested in 153A because, you know, that has been going downhill quite steadily for some time, and it's quite appalling, the result of having to ask applicants to agree to a time extension, and then it just goes on forever and ever and ever. Also, P123A is the same. So who decides these targets? Why do we have data only on these two particular items? Could you tell me about this enforcement matter? Could you explain that again, please, for me? Thank you. Thank you, Graham.
If I can jump in first, as far as I'm aware, and Graham will confirm, enforcement's not a mandatory role of the council. If you don't have an enforcement team, what will eventually happen is all your planners will end up having all the breaches given to them, and it'll make the situation worse. I remember this being considered a few years ago. It's not a mandatory role of the council. It's a role the council decides to conduct, and I think it's right that they do. I think it could be a more stronger team with some more capability, and Graham will confirm, but it's not a mandatory, so there's no legal requirement to have a team. There is a requirement if there's breaches, but then that goes to the planning officers and they're overrun as it is. So hopefully that's answered that one. In relation to who decides the data, the last time I was involved in anything like this was several years ago, where I can't remember if it was the committee had decided it or the executive, I can't remember. But so saying if Louise was here, she'd probably know more than anyone, but she's disappeared. So I can't say how those particular figures, I wouldn't be able to say for sure. Right. So if there are targets that we feel are not included, and there should be a target, well, our role in scrutiny is to put that forward, because otherwise how can we scrutinise something if we haven't got a target to measure it? But I will check with Louise. So we were talking about the targets and the targets that were shown as data only, and there are potentially a couple of targets that people would want to scrutinise more, but it's very difficult if it's data only. So probably the question is, how do we as a committee get some of these targets changed if we don't feel they're appropriate? What is the process for that?
What I would like to know as well is who makes these decisions?
Yeah, and I think that's part of.
Well, apologies for not being here for that bit of the discussion. So sometimes when we have performance indicators where it's difficult to set a target, we tend to sort of have data only. The process for reviewing the Nora's on the call, so she'll sort of hopefully butt in if I say anything that's not accurate, but we will review the performance indicators in January, and we will bring, and then at the January meeting, if this committee feels that there is something that they would like to change, then we would make recommendations as a committee to the executive to change them. So we can review all the heads of service, work with Nora, and Nora asks all the heads of service to sort of look at the performance indicators to see whether they're still accurate and the targets are still what they need to be, because we have a debate most years over things like the targets for complaints, for example, because that's a target that we never actually meet. But is it still the right target? So we need to have that discussion with you, yourselves, and the heads of service, and then and within the executive. So there is a process to review PIs, and so that we can start with any new PI targets as of the 1st of April next year.
No, so at what point was this task taken from councillors, backbenchers, and put into the hands of who to decide on the targets? Because some years ago it was quite a reasonable process, and there was a panel that was selected from ONSs, I believe it was. I was on the panel, and we sat for some hours deciding what the KPIs, what the KPI targets were going to be. That doesn't happen anymore. Does it happen? So when I'm not getting an answer to my question, who decides? That's all I wanted to know. Who makes this decision?
Okay, we've got Councillor Hegan might have an answer for you.
I was going to say, I remember very clearly on the Value for Money Committee, we went through every line of this performance report in each of 2020 and 2021. So very much for the ones that were at that point the responsibility of our committee, we did them line by line as councillors. Yeah, we set them, we discussed them, each one.
And I think we did several after last year or the year before, I can't remember. I think we did with the community wellbeing. So So the process, we know in January they're going to be reviewed. So my request would be if members have particular targets they feel should be considered, let's raise them with the service heads early with you, so we can start moulding that process now rather than doing it at the last minute in January. So absolutely, so it's the right time to discuss this, because January is the time to change the targets. Yeah, I never like when it says 100% target. Well, you've only got to get one tiny thing go wrong and you fail to target every single quarter. So I think they've got to be challenging, but realistic. So if you can forward your comments to the service leads, absolutely, let's make them so we can scrutinise them properly. Now I've got quite a few people had their hands up. So I have had Graham who put his hand up, I think, to come back on a point, and then Councillor Foraszewski, Councillor Reid. Okay, and then Councillor Egan, but I think that might have been the point you wanted to clarify. So if I go to Graham first, Councillor Foraszewski, and then if you do want to come back, Councillor Egan, fine. Thank you, Graham.
Thank you, Chairman. In fact, I was only going to suggest that Nora might have the precise details around those particular indicators, but I think you might have moved on from that now, so that's fine. And we can certainly look at any detail after the meeting. Actually, it was just a very quick point on enforcement, Chairman, and I'm not going to pretend to be a planning expert because I'm not. However, you were right, and you also referred earlier to our policy having teeth, and actually. Members can influence the extent to which our policy has teeth, and that is what I'd suggest that members do when they review the enforcement plan that comes forward in the new year. So it's about resourcing approach and the balancing act that we have to have, and that's where we really want to get members' views. And I think if you want to have longer teeth, then that is a view we want to hear about when we bring the policy to you. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you for that. I'm sure we will scrutinise that and make sure it's got teeth not longer but sharper as well. So I've got two more speakers, Councillor Foraszewski and then Councillor Egan.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I think this is such a difficult one because the planning department as a whole are really up against it, and there's a number of reasons for that, and I don't think any target here is going to actually solve that. You know, I go back to a day when we used to really give the planning team a hard time, but they were good days compared to what today's like. So I do feel for them, and I think there's a number of reasons. But I would say, doing what I do where I live, you know, I talk to a lot of people because it's what I like to do, and I hear various different people tell me different things. And one of the things that I think is worth mentioning, and I'm really pleased to hear Sally say that you know, you're making improvements, and then added to that, I think to give us confidence, maybe forecasts over the next 3 or 4 months as to what those improvements would be, would give us more confidence. Because what I've heard from people on the ground is that they go ahead with things because they don't have confidence in the system, and that's not a criticism, it is just what some people feel that they can do. There's an entitlement. So I think it's really difficult. I think you're up against it. I think that a lot of work needs to be done. It's clearly being done, and I'm glad to hear that. But as I say, I think it would be really nice to see some forecast to give meat on the bones to say that, yes, that is improving. But the other thing I'd like to go back to is, and forgive me for harping on about it, is the enforcement. Because if we look at it, the report talks about enforcement, but it doesn't give us the real gravity of of what's going on out there. You and I both know, and Chairman, I'm so pleased to hear what you just said there, because the stuff that we know about that is costing this council thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds. And I don't know if the time has come, going back to what Graham's point there is, what feedback do you want? Has the time come for us to stop being so nice about it and stop adhering to all these policies? And I find it of great interest that if enforcement isn't really our role, whose role is it? Should we give it to them to deal with, and should they be burdening the cost rather than us? Because you and I both know of a case in a particular part of this borough, which they are just taking the Michael out of us. They really have. And worse than that, it's been going on for decades, and we're powerless. We feel powerless to do anything about it or bring it to a halt, because I mean, we know the story, and we can't obviously say it if it's confidential. So I do feel for the planning team. I think enforcement has to be looked at. It has to be scrutinised. It has to be one of those things. If we're not responsible for it, who is? I know we've got a role to play, and I know we should be actively involved, but we shouldn't be putting up with some of the things that we're going to. And there is parts of this body that I know, and I know really well, and I've seen the distress it caused to people, where landscapes have been decimated, destroyed, and nothing can be done about it. And by the time enforcement's in there, stop actions have been put in place, it's too late. The damage is done, and it's blighting some people's lives. So, you know, as I say, I start where I finish where I start. As a department, you're up against it for a number of reasons, and I think this is something that should be at top of the agenda for scrutiny, so that we can actually get our heads around it. So, well done to Sally for looking at it and trying to put it right. But God, you've got a job on your hands. You really have. So. My feelings go to you. So thank you for listening to me, Chairman.
Thank you. And it's strange, it always seems to be on a bank holiday weekend as well. But there we go. Yeah, and I do accept your comments about planning, but our role is to scrutinise, and sometimes that's even when they're in difficult times that we have to ask the difficult questions and raise performance, even if there are reasons, which is not to what we would expect. And I think the message, I'm sure Sally has got that from our comments tonight and some of the issues, and hopefully Graham also about the enforcement that we want to see. I personally, not preempting it, a really quite strong enforcement policy. You know, in my background, if people do wrong, that's it. You know, it's right and wrong. I'll let you come back, and then I'm going to go to Councillor Hegan.
Just very quickly. That remark there you said about Bank Holiday Monday, it's a fact. It's an actual fact. I've witnessed it. It's a fact. And yet, as a council, as I say, people have to have confidence that we're going to do something. And when people go, it's Bank Holiday Monday, let's bring the diggers in, bulldoze it. You know, we've really got to get our heads around this. But thank you for letting me come back, Chairman.
Councillor Hegan, thank you for being patient.
I was really very much on the same page here, but to just say, from listening to all of the observations tonight, I think that more effective scrutiny in this area will need some form of briefing before the policy is reviewed. Otherwise, there'll be a lot of opinions, possibly not based on fact. So I think that there is a two-stage scrutiny process here involving a briefing of what the issues and options are, what the law allows and what the law doesn't allow, to maybe focus the actual scrutiny of the policy based on that background.
You're absolutely right. Otherwise, we'll spend the whole meeting on one agenda item and won't get anything done. So again, maybe, Graham, we can think of something to do across the council to get views, etc., etc. So we come with a almost ready policy that we can scrutinise rather than actually trying to create it from scratch.
Thank you, Chairman, and I certainly note that and pass that back to Zach and Beth ahead of them bringing the item forward. And thank you also, members, for your general comments around the performance. And you know, the performance for that quarter isn't anywhere near where we want it to be, and it's you know, a role of scrutiny to be concerned and ask what we're doing about it. So I think that was really helpful as a session. So thank you for that. And I'm really hoping that quarter 3 and then quarter 4 will show that direction of travel back to where we want it to be.
Thank you, Graham. I think I'll move on from performance. Don't normally have so much time. Councillor Townsend, you want to have the last word?
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to make comments about these complaints that we have recorded here, in that, do we actually record any dissatisfaction with what we're actually doing here as the officers are doing? Because speaking to some residents since taking over this role, they are not prepared to make a complaint, but they are dissatisfied with their service, but we don't record anything of dissatisfaction and go and ask them for any feedback as to how they feel they've been dealt with, and whether we could look to do that and include it within this area, please. Thank you.
Okay, and again, thank you for that. I'm sure Sally picked up that comment and can give that some thought, whether that information's available, or is it going to be a lot of work to go back to every single person? So it is about trying to get the information, but doing it in a way that we already have it and it's just extracting it. But I know Sally and Graham have picked up that point and they can give that some consideration. I'm going to move us along because, you know, that was a really interesting conversation, but we've still got a couple of chunky items. So agenda item 8, which is a corporate strategy, and I have either the chief executive or the leader to present, and as it's the chief executive isn't here, it will be the leader who's the owner of the plan.
Thank you, Chair. In my view, the leader of the council should be owning the plan and should be presenting it. So I've come here deliberately to do that. So thank you for the opportunity. Good evening, everyone. I just want to quickly say thank you to our officers in general for this evening. I'm pleased to inform you that none of the questions so far posed by either ONSs have been in excess of the sorts of questions I've put to them myself. But I do want to say specifically thank you to Louise and Nora and the team who've assisted with the compilation of this particular document and for the work of all our officers in the delivery of the strategy in general and its various phases. The corporate strategy 2020 to 25 was adopted last October, and this report seeks to update members as to its progress and on the corporate priorities contained within it. The vision of the strategy is that Waverley will be environmentally, economically and financially sustainable with a healthy, inclusive communities and housing available for all those who need it. The economic and societal impacts from COVID-19 are still unfolding, and many of these will join the growing list of structural and even existential challenges to councils across the UK. And these, of course, include the continued threat posed by central government cuts, and as many of you have alluded to effectively here without saying so, the constraints put upon us by national policy in various realms and in particular planning. Councillor Clark and I have been keen for each executive member to take full and appropriate ownership of their sections of the report, and the sections above each of the actions, particularly where it engages with the key priorities for the next 18 months, have been drafted by the exec members themselves and with assistance by heads of services in regards to the actual actions. I'll finish the introduction just by quoting the last section of my introduction to the report itself. For me, no council or administration will ever be perfect, and we should always be striving to do more and to do better. And I know that this sentiment is shared by every member of the exec, and we all take it to heart. And all members and staff have a role in delivering that strategy. Chair, I'm here tonight to take any questions from yourself or any members at your discretion. And if there is anything I'm unable to answer this evening, I'll happily take that away and if necessary, defer to one of our officers, but hopefully I'll be able to take any myself. So thank you, Chair.
Okay, I just have one comment. It's more of a comment, and actually it's right at the start on under financial sustainability, the second bullet point from Councillor Merriweather, where it talks about we won't lose sight of the social value of the services we provide to our residents. So that's not so it's not losing sight of the services because of financial reasons. The reason why I raise that now is when you look at some of the plans for the leisure centre, and there is no plan for a creche, which is for a business reason, but I'm concerned about the social value to people who may need that if they're going to use the facilities. So I'm not necessarily asking for a comment, but it's just to raise it as it's in the report. I absolutely agree with that point. But very rarely do I ever see that point come out in any document. It's normally about the financial benefits rather than the social benefits like a creche.
If I may just comment briefly on that, every single report produced by this council not only mentions the financial benefits, but it also talks about the health and well-being elements of it and also the carbon and environmental impact. So we, where possible, try and account now in money, in carbon and in well-being. So far from it that it's not mentioned at any point, it's mentioned every time. There will be elements such as a creche, which I very much hope that you mention in this particular instance, but I would argue that it's mentioned every time in every report now on every subject. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, opening up for members. Councillor Darcy, thank you.
I wanted to ask about the number 2, which is the participative government. I remember that we had, I appreciate that COVID's had a big impact on this and it's made it very difficult. But I remember we had a listening panel with regard to the proposed drilling at Dunsfold, which I remember was very successful. And it was an innovative way of hearing from the community. And I would very much like us to continue with those sort of initiatives. And I feel that we need to be a bit more imaginative as well in engaging, because sort of standard form of consultation is very stale. You know, put something on a website, maybe invite a few people. But it would be nice to be able to get more involvement, and particularly the deliberative type, where people come and engage and talk, get informed, and then discuss and debate, and then come up with recommendations. And if we could do that with the members of the community, that was what I would be expecting from participative government. And I just wondered if that was possible to be considered for the future.
So the short answer is yes. The long answer is there's been a few other things other than that first listening panel. It was probably 2 or 3 weeks ago during the beginning of COP that I was sitting in here, first with Broadwater children and then with Godalming College children as we debated the climate crisis and how to fix it. And they did a damn sight better than we saw in the real world in both stages. We're also been, over the pandemic, been looking at working with the University of Surrey to provide a variation of citizens' assembly so that we can actually look at some of these deliberative processes and also provide the academic framework with the backing of the university to actually do that in a proper and serious way. If any member has any other ideas about how we could and should engage with the community, particularly with young people, every member of the exec and particularly Councillor Townsend, who's here with me and has run things like the Friday Night Project in Cranley and youth councils. These are things that we would consider, you know, in a heartbeat. Certainly, I'm doing that at the town and parish level, and we would love to do more of that here, always.
Any other comments? Councillor Rouse.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, in answer to that question, Paul, I think that we could do better, and I've thought for a long time that we could do better, forever actually. Many people grow up not understanding the different levels of local authority. They don't know the difference between parish council, borough council, county council. They don't know who does what. And I feel that and have done and have said before that we should be going into schools and in sixth form schools and explaining and trying then to foster an interest in government of all kinds, actually, but at least to explain where they live. This is what happens. This is how what happens to you. This is how your bin gets emptied, because people simply don't know. So I think that would be a very good thing for us to be involved with. Thank you.
And I agree completely, Councillor Else. I myself have been into 9 different schools over the course of my time as a Waverley Borough Councillor to explain exactly this sort of issue. I honestly consider it one of my personal missions as a councillor to try and explain how our overly convoluted system of local government works to quite literally anybody I can explain it to and who will listen. The comms function of this council equally takes up that role with vigour, and Ian certainly does his best to communicate not only what we do, but why we do it and how we do it and the structure of what we do. And certainly that is something that, you know, to quote myself again from this very strategy, we can always do better on this, and we absolutely should. We try and engage with schools as much as possible, but certainly the things that I mentioned about things like youth councils and things like that, that is how we educate on the structure of government in this country. To be quite honest, I think the structure of local government in this country is bad. So I'm quite honestly, most of the time also talking to students and other people about how we might make it better too. And I consider that a role of good councillors as well. So I think we do this, we should definitely do it more, we should definitely do it better, but we definitely do some of it already.
Thank you. I think Councillor, she wanted to come back.
Yes, thank you for letting me come back. Well, that's very good, and I'm glad to hear that you do that. But I feel that what we should be doing is lobbying to get it onto the syllabus, onto the school onto the school syllabus, if you like, and so that it's not so much down to us, but it's actually within the in the school that it's taught. And the fact that you are evangelical about a local government is a very good thing, but I don't think that's the only thing that pupils need or young people need to hear about. I think they need to understand how it actually is, as well as how it could be better, but how it actually is. So if we could somehow get it on to get through to schools via Surrey, maybe, I don't know. Thank you.
If I may, Chair, the government does quite a good job.
I'm going to move it on a little bit because I think we're 25 to 9 and we've still got the Cranny Leisure Centre. Councillor Mary, I think you wanted to make a point and then we'll...
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a small point. I want to raise it in the Cranny Leisure Centre item as well. It's the track record that I always play about PV panels. I take the view that, you know, if we had to build our own power station to cater for the power needs when the sun doesn't shine, why would we want to buy 2 sets of power generation systems? It doesn't make sense. The PV panels are an additional, they're a nicety, but if we've already got a power generation system which is, say, carbon free, which we're told most of them are, and there will be 10 years, 15 years when we have nuclear power systems, why are we going down the PV panel route? It's just, to my mind, a waste of money. There is no benefit from a CO2 point of view. There may be a benefit from a cost point of view, but certainly not from a CO2 point of view. Thank you.
Okay, I'm sure Kelvin has picked up that point and maybe not understood the point, but he's picked it up. I'm tempted to move this on now. I'll finish with the one comment. I think it was very noble to say no council is perfect. I'll move on at that point. Okay, thank you for that. I'm sure there'll be plenty of other time to feed back into the plan, but unfortunately we're running out of time. I think my argument too much on the agenda has come into roost already. So we'll move on to agenda item number 9, which is the Cranny Leisure Centre investment. Kelvin, I think you're going to lead on this, and then difficult questions you're going to pass on.
Thank you, Chair. You've summarised my introduction very well. Yes, councillors, in front of you is a very detailed and substantive report, and I'm also aware that some members may be new to the Cranny Leisure Centre itself. So I will seek to sort of take you through the presentation to summarise the salient points for consideration. But as the Chair has quite rightly said, I'm not an expert on all things, so I'm lucky enough to have Peter Vickers, who's just appeared on your screen, who will be able to cover off the financial slide later on in the presentation, and then Fatini Vickers will join us as well to cover off the sustainability element. So I'm going to dovetail.
Kelvin, when people look at their papers, you might find that you haven't got the pink papers for the confidential, so just be aware of that. There are confidential papers, but unfortunately they haven't been marked up on pink. So if we do stray very quickly, we'll have to go into exempt, especially if you haven't got the page numbers. But basically, from what I can see, it's the feasibility study is an exempt, plus the documents that follow.
Yeah.
Then that takes you all the way up to agenda item 10. That's the best way as I can describe what I think is in the confidential and should be on pink. Thank you, Kel. I just thought I'd mention that in case we strayed into it.
Yeah, so yeah, as I was just saying, Fiona's going to lead us through the presentation, so every now and then I'll be saying, next slide, please, Fiona. This is a significant project. That was just an example of what I was going to say, Fiona. So we're on the next slide, but this is a significant project that will hit several of the key corporate priorities of the council. So we're already failing. It was the first one I wanted to see the picture. So if you can go back one. So this is Cranny Leisure Centre. Bit of background, it was built in 1969 with a lifespan of 40 years. So we're already way past its best. We did carry out minor internal refurbishment in 2009, sort of 1.6 million. That was very much playing around with the sort of internal structure, not the main structure of the building. And we didn't touch any of the pool plant room or the pool structure itself. Currently runs, not unsurprisingly, because it's age at a deficit, so it costs the council to open it. It's one of the few leisure centres we run that has that deficit payment. And as I said, it's beyond its life. So when I talk about an investment, this is more our commitment to a leisure facility. Doing nothing here to keep it open will require significant sums of money over the next 4 or 5 years, and that will only be repairing a failing building that will not add to the revenue return for the council. So in sort of financial terms, this is sort of a latent liability that we have here. And but saying that, it is very well used by the local residents of Cranley and the surrounding area. Next slide, please, Fiona. So just as by way of a project background, there's been a previous commitment to a multi-million-pound investment in the Cranley area. So in 2019, we carried out a feasibility study to look at the possibility of bringing forward a new leisure centre in Cranley. It also looked at where it could go and sort of explore the sites around. Obviously, then we entered the pandemic, and in March sort of 2020, we put all corporate projects on hold. And as members are completely aware, the leisure industry got particularly hard hit and was one of the first sort of services to close and one of the latter ones to open. So we felt prior to bringing forward, we still had that latent liability of the leisure centre. It hadn't gone away. We reopened with bated breath and hoped that everything would work when we turned it back on. It did, which was fortunate and good. But we felt that it was still needed to look at a feasibility study. So we reinvested in another feasibility just to look at it. I'm not going to say sound post-pandemic, but after the pandemic, to see if the findings of the previous report in 2019 still stood. Really, so all those papers are within the documents you have in front of you. So the proposal we're looking at is to really look at a new leisure centre that deals with the current demand, but also there's significant housing numbers in and around Cranley area. So it also takes on the future demand that will be needed in the area for leisure and health and fitness. If you can go to the next slide, please, Fiona. So what we have really then is part of the feasibility report is what do we need to offer. So what we have in front of us here is actually a list that's not dissimilar to that of the 2019 feasibility report. As I spoke earlier regarding performance, public are returning to the leisure centres quicker than anticipated, and the feedback from our consultants were that actually leisure will be in a good position and back to sort of pre-pandemic levels quicker than they thought. So by the time we'll be coming to look at a new facility, they were predicting that the industry will be back to full level as before. So these are what, looking at the housing demand, the indoor leisure facility strategy and the need projected out over the 30 years, this was the list of facilities that the consultants brought forward and feel that would be needed to be in the new leisure centre. Now, this is the starter for 10 to some extent. The report I have in front of you will be the first hopeful commitment from the council for me to go into a much more detailed look at the specification, what should be included, and working with a team of experts as we go through that. But that is what we're proposing in the new facility if we were to go forward. We can go to the next slide. So what we have here is sort of looking at the sort of proposed locations, if you can go to all the points on there. So what, just remind members, we looked at 9 options identified. So we looked around the Village Way car park, which is the area that's in red there. We looked out towards Snoxall Fields, Bruce Mackenzie Fields. There was an area that we looked round, but what transpired when you started looking at planning constraints, costs of building, ownership of land, it really started to centre around the importance of keeping it centrally to the town centre. So we actually ended up focusing pretty much where the current leisure centre is, in the prime sort of, if you were to look at it from scratch and not to have a leisure centre, you would build it probably on the leisure centre site that it currently is. So what we've moved forward with, we looked at 5 options around the actual Village Way car park, one of which obviously was to either refurbish the current leisure centre, knock down and rebuild, or was there any other area that would fulfill the requirements that we're looking to do? Because one of the challenges, obviously, if you look at knocking down or rebuilding on the current site, is you lose a leisure provision for a significant length of time. So a demolish and rebuild will be a 2-year period. So therefore, it was felt that we needed to try and keep the current site open. So if we go to the next slide, Fiona. So what came out as the sort of strongest position on many different areas, be that, as you can see, no loss of service, financial and optimal layout, was really to build a new leisure centre forward, bring it forward just slightly north of the current leisure centre site. So it's not extremely clear on this slide, but there's a dotted line. By building it where we are there, we're able to keep open the current leisure centre whilst the build for the new leisure centre came forward. So that obviously brings forward no loss of finance, so we can continue to operate whilst we're building a new one. The challenges obviously will be around car parking, how we deal with those challenges that we'd have to work through. We can build it on a much smaller site, because if you look at the current leisure centre, it's a bungalow in essence. They've taken a lot of space and it's all at one level. When you move to a new centre, you can build 2 stories, so that creates less of a footprint. What we also thought when working with the consultants, by moving it slightly north, one of the things you can do is open up what is actually a beautiful area, the Snoxall Park, and link much more effectively with the Snoxall Fields, and create hopefully a much clearer link to basically a much greener area around there, opening it up, because housing will be coming quite close to the new centre. So that's where the preferred location was coming. If we move to the next slide, which I believe is the climate emergency implications, I'm going to say, Fatini, are you there? No. So that's hi, Fatini. You can talk us through this one.
Thank you, Kelvin. So obviously this is a great opportunity for us to showcase a flagship project in terms of the carbon neutrality targets that we have and the climate emergency that we've declared. Leisure centres do account for quite a significant amount of our baseline emissions. Cranny in 2019-20, Cranny was 11%. So you know, any energy efficiency improvements we can do here will have an impact. So we are currently we will be exploring with energy consultants so the options, but I think the aspiration is that we go for a low carbon building. Passive house standard, if possible, will be explored. There are a couple of passive house leisure centres, well, examples of leisure centres out there at the moment, so we can do a lot of learning from them. But at this stage, I think the aspiration is that we will be looking at low carbon, zero carbon, if that is a possibility, leisure centre, and obviously the financial implications of that will have to be taken into consideration. So a passive house standard leisure centre is 60 to 70% reductions is what could be achieved, and all of those options will be looked at, and an energy strategy will be produced at the next stage of this project, the design stage, which will incorporate renewable energy, you know, passive design, fabric first approach, and you know, very low energy or electricity consumption on site. So I think I need to hand over to finance. Next slide.
It is, yes. So Peter, I'm passing over to Peter Vickers now. you able to join us?
I am indeed. Thank you. So on the basis that Cranny will continue to have a municipal leisure centre on site, financially we have a choice to make, and the choice really boils down to this. It's continue with the current leisure centre, and Kelvin's pointed out that there's latent liability sitting there, or alternative is to reprovision the facility with a modern future-proofed new build to service the expected future capacity and the health priorities. So that's what it really boils down to. And therefore, the reality is that both options will require borrowing of a significant level to continue with that facility. And the choice really to be made is effectively the financial difference between the comparison of the revenue implications of either carrying on with what we've got and patching it and refurbing it as we go along, or actually putting a modern new facility on there that's a lot more efficient and effective and attractive. So the equation really comes down to the annual revenue implications over the next 40 or 50 years of operation. The current revenue costs in our 2021 budget don't fully reflect that latent liability. In fact, they reflect very little of the latent liability that sits there. You know, we know there's some millions of pounds required on the plant machinery and the building itself going forward within the condition surveys that we've got. To keep it operational, we have to reflect that when we do a proper comparison as we're doing now to a new build. So that's what's reflected in the slide on screen there. You've got the new build on the car park, and it shows the estimated capital cost of putting that in place, and then the annual revenue cost to the general fund. And then it shows in the next column the saving that will be achieved. Now that savings based on the fact that costing in the latent liability of carrying on operating the leisure centre as it is, patching and refurbing, repairing where necessary, we know there's an estimated £759,000 a year operating cost to us in some form or other. That reality would be very lumpy as we went through that over time. But for comparison purposes, that's what we're comparing to. So therefore, the choice really boils down to either carry on as we are, accepting there's a significant liability sitting there, or a new build, which is what's on the table here tonight for us to look at. And a lot of the numbers really, ultimately, as we proceed through this, a lot of the revenue implication really will be dependent on a number of factors. One of them will be build inflation as we go through this, because you know we're in a challenging time in that respect, and also our financing strategy on how we ultimately finance this, and that's something that we'll be looking at as a next step of this project, because we do have options on just how we become financially efficient on delivering this this facility going forward. So I think I've covered all the key points that we really need to consider from a financial perspective.
Thank you, Peter. And I'll just bring your attention to the second row here on this table where it says include health provision. One of the things that we felt would be important if we're bringing forward such an investment in health and well-being and leisure in the Cranny area, that we should look at the opportunity of working with health colleagues and seeing if there's additional services that could be brought onto the site to add to supporting at the health and well-being of our residents. And what that additional sum there is linked into some examples that were given to us as part and parcel of the report we received from SLC. We can go to the next slide. This was just what I wanted to be clear is we will still have a risk for a period of time keeping the current leisure centre open if we were to move forward, you know, because there's a significant timeline to building such a new centre. There's a lot of prep work, and this just gives you an idea of how long that will take. These are rough estimated timescales from ourselves and the consultants. you know, what we would be looking to do really is include the new build option, if council agree, with our new contract in July 2023, so that we can move forward with the new contractor to de-risk the project and make sure that they're involved in delivering this new centre. But as we can see, we're looking at October 25, that sort of timescale before a new centre would be open. Thank you very much, Fiona. So just to conclude sort of the presentation, really, you know, we've got a comfort facility, and as Peter's explained, and hopefully I've made it clear, that it's exceeded its life expectancy. If we're committed to a leisure service or a leisure provision within Cranley, you know, we need to do something. There's a significant cost just to keep the current centre open over the next 5 to 10 years. It's not just a financial decision. As Peter again said, there's social value, there's health benefits and community benefits that we need to take in consideration when making such a large financial commitment. And I understand that it's a big number we're talking about, but also it gives us a tremendous opportunity to really deliver against the climate emergency and reduce our carbon emissions. You know, Fatini alluded to the fact, you know, I think it's over 40% of our energy costs sit with our leisure centres. This would be the first one we can bring forward and take 11% off of our carbon footprint. You know, that's a fantastically exciting thing to bring forward. So it hits things on such such key corporate priorities. I think it's very exciting. And then just to summarise the recommendations on the next slide, Fiona. I thought we did very well in the end, Fiona. You know, it is a significant budget. I'm not sat here saying, council, please, if you can give me 20 million, that'll be fantastic, and off I go and build a new leisure centre. What I'm saying is there is a financial package and a social package that says we can deliver this. What I'm asking, and that needs to be allocated and planned for in our medium-term financial plan. But what I'm really saying is we need to take this forward. We need to bring forward some experts to work with bring some additional resource and professional technical advice in, that $250,000, to get us to the next stage, so that I can bring something back to you that says, hopefully my aim would be, this can be delivered at this cost, this is what it will look like, and bring back a much detailed project for you to consider and hopefully approve. It's a significant thing we've tried to explain to you. Hopefully it's given you a good idea of the life of this project. It's not a new one. It's something that's been with us as a challenge for a significant length of time. And I'm just pleased here to be one of the officers able to sort of put forward a proposal that I think brings forward some real positive opportunity for Cranley in the area. Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to sort of take any questions, and as Councillor Dina said, anything particularly complicated I will pass to my colleagues who are on the call. Thank you very much.
I've got a couple of speakers. Maybe if I can go to Councillor Forrest first, as being one of the Cranley, and then Councillor Coburn.
That's very kind of you, Chairman. Thank you very much. I'd just like to start by saying doing nothing is not an option. And what we have before us, I believe, is terribly exciting. I really do. I think we have fought for a new leisure centre in Cranley for an awful long time, and I'm absolutely delighted that we have something here before us this evening. However, I have a number of concerns, I have a number of issues, and I have a number of questions that I'd like answered, but tonight is not the time or the place. What we should be looking at is the recommendations before us, and I think Kelvin used a key word here, which was opportunity. Please let us not miss this opportunity, because Cranley deserves it. Papering over the cracks. I'm a member of the gym. I think they do a fantastic job. It's a great place to go, and it is just a lovely, lovely environment to be in. But it has passed its sell-bust. And as I say, the only option you have here, the only financial option here you have is a no-brainer, is a rebuild. Having said that, there's a lot of questions that we need to ask, but that's for another day and another time. So when we look at what we're looking for and what we want it to look like, when that comes another day, what we need to do is get these recommendations passed, get to the stage of planning permission, and get meat on the bones to say, let's go ahead with it. The report is terribly complex. I think to try to delve into it at this time of night, having had, been here for a couple of hours now, wouldn't do it justice. And as I say, I don't believe it's the time or the place. But I would like to congratulate everybody involved in this, because I was never in doubt that this would come before committee. But I think there's been some serious challenges that would have jeopardised that, financial ones. And I would say for the health and the well-being of people of Cranley and the staff and so forth, is that spend, because if you have an opportunity to do it, and I'm sure you'll get it back over a long period of time. So I congratulate you for bringing this to the table, and I personally endorse all the recommendations before us. And when it comes to putting meat on the bones, I think there is an opportunity then for us to really scrutinise this properly. And I would like to know how that process is going to happen and with what involvement and from who, because I think that's where your key players then come in. But for now, for here, the recommendations I support wholeheartedly. Thank you, Chairman, for your indulgence.
Councillor Coburn, apologies for making you wait.
Well, I'll explain. Well, you may understand why when I speak. Mary Forashevsky and I always forgot on like a house on fire for years, have we not, Mary? One of the reasons is we both like a good blether. The other reason is that we both like our coffee and cake, and thank goodness the cafe was included. But what I was actually going to say was, she is like me when she's got something she wants to achieve. She never gives up. Mary has taught about this Cranny Leisure Centre, thank goodness she has, for years, and has never let us forget it. Whenever you go over to Cranny, you're always shown the old leisure centre, and you have it explained to you why you need a new leisure centre. I mean, quite frankly, Kelvin, I mean, much as we have all this, I think the door was very much open, having sort of listened to Mary over the years and being shown what is left of Cranny Leisure Centre. Everything Councillor Forashevsky has just said is absolutely right. There's no way we can go into detail in this, but it is so exciting. And thank goodness there are certain things that we seem to talk about for years and never achieve. And when you get something which, you feel you're getting closer and closer to, it's wonderful news. Cranley needs this leisure centre, needs it as quickly as we can deliver it. But obviously it's a huge project, and there's no way it can be done in a fortnight, much as Mary and I would always like to do everything in a fortnight. But, I think it is very, very exciting. And I'm sure people like Councillor Marriott can put in his two penneth with his scientific background, and other people can, advise. But I think, I always think these, going back to our, whatever we used to call them, the special interest groups and all that sort of thing, getting a group of people together at some point with the interest and the expertise, or even just the people who use a gym, just to get this thing right, get the detail right. The big things, obviously, we'll have to use the consultants, the experts in the field, but we need this to be right. And I think it's terribly exciting. I'm so excited for Cranley. I'll be over there again, opening doors, whatever I need to do, fundraising, you name it, I'll be over there to get this project off the ground, because I think it is so important, so overdue, and so exciting. So thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you for that. And our community wellbeing overview and scrutiny, so the old group did have a lead, and it was Councillor Forashevsky who led on behalf of our ONS to progress that. Next we've got Councillor Marriott, and then I've got Councillor Reid, and then Councillor Hegan.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just a couple of comments. I think, Kelvin, we've discussed before, if you go into David Lloyd's site, you find they've got like a workroom for people to take their laptops, go and use the facilities, buy a coffee or lunch or something. Oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry. Yes, in David Lloyd clubs, they have a meeting room, or a working room, let's say, for the users of the facilities. People can buy a coffee, buy a lunch or whatever. It adds to the footfall. If they have that facility there, people might come into the sports centres, the leisure facilities, to spend the money. So that might be useful as a part of your business case. And secondly, not on this science particularly, but I'd like to know at some point, not today, not tonight, you mentioned these numbers, 11% savings, and there's a 47% number in section 3.3. Could you explain how those numbers are derived? Could I have some background on that, please? And secondly, just a comment, you talk on section 3.3.6, the idea that we could be carbon neutral if we had electricity supplied by on-site solar PVs. To do that, you would need a solar farm about 1.5 miles square, which, you know, feasibility is a problem. And even then, of course, it's not providing the power when, like today, there's no sun. So it's back to what I said earlier about the feasibility and effectiveness and whether it's sensible. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you, Councillor Marriott. Yeah, and I think I would happily provide those answers and where the figures have come from for you to look at. Yes, and I think, as you say, there'll be a suite of energy, sort of different ways of supplying the energy, and we will, again, I can take members on that journey. But yes, we will look at that. But I take your point that you maybe are slightly ambitious to do it on PV panels, but there's a very clear sort of examples where you can achieve passive house sort of carbon facilities that we will look at, certainly one in a neighbouring authority in Spelthorne that we'll be meeting with and reviewing. But the aspiration of carbon neutrality will entail offsetting if we were to achieve that, we believe. I know Fatini's not with us now, but we will certainly feed back that information to you. And with regard to additional facility mix, absolutely, I think that was the starter for 10, the need identified. As we move forward, we can look at all options. The cafe and that central meeting place is a way that lots of leisure centres are moving forward to create greater footfall. So yes, certainly part of the consideration.
Thank you. Thank you. So you can add that to your email as well. That email's getting longer and longer. Got Councillor Reid next.
Thank you, Chair. I am one of 5 members, councillors for Cranley, and Cranley doesn't only have the leisure centre for Cranley as a large village, it now has to encompass many new developments. Not only that, we are called the Cranfold area. We take all sorts of villages that from, you know, miles around, and they all need to use the Cranley Leisure Centre. We're 10 miles from Guildford, we're 10 miles from Dorking, we're 10 miles from Godalming, and we're 10 miles from
Horsham.
Thank you very much. Yes, Horsham. And so it's really important. I'm as excited as everyone else, mostly because of the environmental achievements that are going to be, or yes, the achievements that we hope will be developed here. I think that perhaps, Councillor Marriott, I'm really, really happy that you're supporting us from Farnham area, and also the photovoltaic panels, maybe even by the time it's 2023, maybe old hat, and we might be thinking about another form of making electricity. But it's not to be dismissed. It is a form of making energy. I won't go into details. I don't know the details, but I support always that initiative and those initiatives. But I just wanted to touch on the other benefits, which are the health benefits of linking up with the health centre, also linking up with the facilities at Snoxall, which are the playing fields and all the sports facilities and areas around. I'm excited too about the idea of the pool, which could provide hydrotherapy. And hopefully some of our physiotherapists in the village will use the facilities there too. Now, I think that should be encouraged. Just looking through my list of things, the current manager, Sean, has been excellent. He has done various initiatives in the past, including the whole communities that provide facilities for healthy living. I've actually been myself to one of those meetings, and I know he's done his best with really, really, well, shabby facilities now. They are becoming. So I commend him at this meeting for what he's done. And I also want to commend the work of the parish council, and in particular, Councillor Elizabeth Townsend. The parish council, I believe, having been a parish councillor, own this car park where the development will take place. And that is another advantage, is it not? And thank you very much for all the work you've done, Councillor Townsend.
Thank you very much. Councillor Hegan.
I'm not here to rain on the parade, but being an escapee from the other committee, am I allowed to ask questions, more detail on the finances without going into exempt?
If you can indicate which page you're talking about, then we might understand whether it's.
Well, I'd like to go into Appendix 4 and also the comment on page.
That's exempt.
All right.
We can go into exempt, and there's a process.
Okay, I mean, maybe let everyone else speak then before we do that.
Okay. Well, Councillor Elfson, I've got a couple of points.
Thank you, Chairman. So I think this is very, very good. I'm really pleased to hear this. Was it really only in 2019 that the investigations and SLC was it really 2019 or was it before then? Because, it seemed to me, it was a bit like deja vu, the presentation, seen it all before. And the only difference, actually, I'm really pleased that it's going to happen at last. And I'm absolutely, totally amazed that Cranny Leisure Centre hasn't fallen down by now, because it was falling down then. But was it really, is that a true timeline of everything? And it's pretty much what was decided back in 2019. I'm sure there must be, the position was the preferred position, etc. and so forth. The only difference that I can see, apart from, I'm sure there are lots, carbon neutral issues are going to come to £5 million more than the previous estimate. So how much difference is there apart from the carbon neutral? Is it pretty much the same that's been on the drawing board for, and you're telling me it is 2019, I would have thought it was 2018 we started it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. No, it was completed in 2019. So I imagine it might have crept perhaps into the end of 2018, but it was certainly a 2019 report, the feasibility report. The 5 million increase from that original report isn't all down to carbon neutrality. You're looking at a sort of 15% uplift on the cost to make it carbon neutral, but there are additional, obviously, cost inflations in construction anyway that equates to the other amount. And the report that's been carried out in 2021 was really to test the findings of 2019, and it was, so yes, there is a large resemblance to that original report, but obviously once you've gone through a pandemic, there's some real detailed questions that need to be challenged again. So it was an updated report from there. But yes, it's in the same location as it previously was, but now with that carbon neutrality element, it gives a real another big tick, shall we say.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm just going to add a couple of points. It was raised about the process for further scrutiny, as we've only sort of really looked at the principles, but not really getting into the details. So I would just like how you're going to involve this committee in, whether it's a workshop or whatever, to go through the finer details. I think that needs to be resolved. Just a couple of issues. Again, I'll raise them. I'm not expecting you to answer tonight, Kelvin. 2.2.2, which is about 250k for the consultants. The Dunsfold Park project has Rachel, which is employed permanently to do that role. I would just ask that we look at, is a similar type of role more cost effective than going and getting consultants, which always charge about 4 times the amount of money. Just something I think should be looked at, which is best value. But having 20 spectator seating for the teaching pool, I know it's getting into the detail. Is that really enough? That's the sort of thing mums and dads, especially when it's young children, 20 doesn't seem to be a great deal. Point 5.3, so we're still not in exempt, which is under your legal section. It talks about the current leisure management contract expiring 30th of June 2023 with no provisional ability for further extension. Having read that, you can't actually tell what happens then after that date, as it's going to be 2025 before it's built. It says there's no possibility of an extension. That's probably it for this level of conversation. I think Graham's hand is up as well. So there are points, so I don't know if Graham wants to come in first. There are points that you don't necessarily need answers, because I think they need to be flushed out, but I think they just need to be registered, those issues, so you can give them some thought. Graham, do you want to come in first and then over to Kelvin?
Chairman, thank you. And actually, Chairman, you've led me nicely into what I was going to say, that was sort of prompted by Councillor Hegan wanting to get into numbers. And I think it's absolutely right. This is a really big, really important project. And so you know, I was wondering whether you would want to, maybe not tonight, but after this meeting, you know, break this down into some chunks whereby members of the committee can engage with officers on a more detailed, informal basis. So, for example, if members want to get into the numbers, that's fine. Peter and I can sit down with them. If members want to get into the environmental aspects, they could do that with the officers, or the leisure mix, they could do that with Kelvin and Tamsin. And you know, whether you would want to do that as a way of enabling members to engage in the detail and sort of pick the bits that they want to do. So just a suggestion, Chairman.
Thank you. I mean, I sit here facing the clock, which I'm not sure everybody can see the time, and we're coming up to 20 past, oh, you have got one, 20 past 9. And I mean, to me, once you get to 2.5 hours as a maximum, I think that's far too long for a meeting. I'm also very conscious that we've got Anna, who sat here very patiently for a 70 or 80 page document. And then we've got the first homes approach policy, which I can't see us getting through all of that tonight. So I don't know what members' views are, but I think they've waited very patiently, but I'm not sure we're going to actually get to discuss. So I'll open up to what people's views are on how long they want to carry on.
I think on this matter, it's so huge that I think, you know, what Graham Clark has said is correct. You know, we should be having another, you know, big wash up when we can actually say what we think properly, and we're not, you know, constrained by time or by, in this case, putting something into exempt. So I think we've had a good, thorough introduction. We know where we want to go, but there's so many questions that we'd be here, you know, in 2.5 days, let alone 2.5 hours. So personally, I think, you know, I would like to move on from this subject and have a look at Arno's trees.
Absolutely. I mean, I've got highlights all over my papers, nothing of any, you know, showstoppers, but questions. I just don't have the information. So are people happy that we move on from this? There are some recommendations. I'll come to you in a second, Mary. The recommendations, well, I can't tell what page they're on. I'm guessing page 97, if you can see the page number. But it almost seems like this is the recommendations for the executive rather than us. So
I guess you could, as a committee, indicate if you would recommend that exec
considers those recommendations.
Yeah, follow up that, accept those recommendations, which it sounds from the tenor of the conversation like you would.
So maybe if I could summarise, and I'll come to me if there's anything additional, that the recommendations which are on page 97 which appear to be the recommendations to the executive, we would endorse as a sensible way forward. But with also the proviso that we want some further engagement, I think, on a standalone item with no other agenda items, whether that needs to be a meeting set up just for this, because I have loads and loads of points I wanted to raise, which I've highlighted, which would take me an hour, let alone 8 or 10 other people to do that. I'm sure Martin's got loads of issues that he wants to raise, and questions in relation to the loads and loads of points. Are people happy with that as a general way forward for tonight? So is everyone happy with that? We recommend the recommendations with the proviso that there's a standalone policy. Before we go to that, Mary, is there any points you want to specifically raise?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you very much for letting me come back. But I think you're exactly right in what you're saying. I think Graham's really hit the nail on the head, and maybe we could use what Graham has said to add that to a recommendation here, so we know that we have to go through that process through an approved recommendation, and we've got it there in front of us then.
If I could make a suggestion, Chairman, I mean, perhaps the recommendation of the committee tonight, it sounds as though you're endorsing the principle that's sort of set out here, but this is going to ultimately be a council decision. It's not an executive decision. So this is just a recommendation that the executive recommends to council. So ultimately, you will all be part of voting at council to make this decision. So perhaps the ONS committee endorses the general principle, but you feel it would be useful to perhaps have an informal briefing where you can go into your individual questions and sort of go through in detail all those items that I can see you have highlighted on your agenda. And I expect many other councillors will have the same, and also to enable all the other sort of 50 or 40 odd councillors who are going to be making this decision at council to have the opportunity to have their questions asked.
Yeah, because I think for it to go to the council with so many questions unanswered will be on one of our marathon 3 evening sessions. I think if we can get the majority of the detail done, and then a discussion at council will be much more focused. So the recommendations are that it goes to the executive with those recommendations, but with those additional points, so we can go through the finances, some of the operational stuff, some of the particular points. I really don't want to delay this. I will allow you a very, very quick, Councillor Townsend, but that will be it.
Thank
we need
you.
to move on.
Thank you, Chairman. And as the portfolio holder, I was just going to say, I hear what you're saying. I'm quite happy to arrange briefings for councillors with Kelvin, and obviously with Graham and Peter. So before it comes then before full council. Thank you.
Okay, we'll wait with anticipation for those dates. Okay, thank you, Kelvin, for that. I think a really good explanation of a very, very complex issue in very simple terms. And I didn't ask you what the BREEAM process was rather than the passive house. So you got away with that one. Right, shall we have 2 more items. Oh no, apologies that you've had to wait so long. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Well, as people have the report and the actual policy or draft policy in front of them, this came about as part of the climate emergency declaration, and initially it was intended to be a tree planting policy, which then subsequently ballooned into this this paper. Because it was felt that tree planting alone doesn't tackle climate change. And we already had a tree safety document, and we just felt it was necessary to actually make or come up with a comprehensive approach to this council's tree ownership and what it represents, especially in view of the fact that Waverley is one of the most heavily wooded councils in the whole of England, not Britain, but England. What we're trying to do is tying into the corporate and the corporate strategy and the service plans, and part of the intention of this document is to inform and educate, to also channel community interest and the wish to be involved in action, to formalize our approach to tree and woodland management, not just risk management, and setting out how we deal with risk management in a bit more detail, and how to deal with complaints about trees in general, because we do get quite a lot of complaints. People say they love trees, but when we get our phone calls. Climate proofing and carbon sequestration been mentioned almost on every item this evening, and these are clearly very important aspects. Trees alone will not do this, but they can contribute. And I think one point I've already mentioned, but I want to bring out more, and is brought out more in this document, is the planting versus managing existing woodlands more actively in terms of what benefits there are. I don't really feel I need to or want to add too much more, and I would like to invite any questions or comments.
Thank you, Arno, for being very clear and concise. That's very useful. Members, Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Arno, for that presentation. I've read all of this and I've got a couple of questions. One is, how do we compensate for trees, for example, ash dieback in a great big area? We have some in Cranny that have a great cluster of them that have been felled. They were quite mature. I mean, what is the replacement for those and all over the borough? Because, you know, they're all subject to the ash dieback. The second thing I'd like to ask about is the habitats, because having been on the Cranny and South Eastern Agricultural Society, we had a visitation talking about woodland and linking woodland, you know, across areas. So how do you manage that? And do you manage that, please? Thank you.
Thank you, Carmen. Thank you for that question, and it's one that's also close to Councillor Darcy's heart. Hedgerows are clearly important in terms of connectivity for biodiversity. But what we also have is lots of roadside woodland, basically, strips of woodland, especially in the east of the borough, where connectivity is addressed, let's put it that way. So there are links there. We can clearly only do what we can do on our own land. We can try to stimulate others to follow our example, but in the end, the importance is that we address our land and the benefits that we find on our particular sites to improve that in terms of connectivity, but also going back to your comments on ash dieback, how we can actually compensate for that either by natural regeneration and allowing that and stimulating that, or indeed in those areas where that's unlikely to be successful, to actually introduce new trees. And that is certainly an area that we do want to address and are addressing.
Councillor Coburn.
Yes, thank you. One point we raised at a previous meeting of this committee was whether this was standalone or whether it was actually going to, you know, how it was going to fit in basically with all the other strategies. And I think one of the things that worried us that at the time, planning hadn't been sort of mentioned particularly strongly. And we felt that, you know, it's an opportunity, but, you know, we've got certain policies now that do either back the sylvan nature of an area or back the biodiversity. I know the action plan's not ready yet, but you've got the tree plan. And I just really, it's a plea really for more sort of active support when we have a policy that, you know, from yourself and other officers, so that we're backing what we want to do in planning terms, because otherwise we'll be putting our little trees in certain areas and trying to get our connectivity, which Councillor Darcy and I have been trying to sort of push for a bit. But, you know, when you get some of this building, you know, it's our only opportunity, if you like, to try and say enough's enough. You know, we've got to have mitigation for the harm and really make that mitigation work for the harm that the built form is creating. So I do hope that, you know, this will really play its part in backing up the policies, which, as we know, when we go to appeal, they like to turn these policies that we think are very important into something not very important. But, you know, I mean, second to bins, people like their trees, don't they? I mean, you get complaints about your bins, but if somebody's cutting down a tree, you know, my goodness, the phone's ringing. So, you know, I think it is such an important part of the character of our area, whether it's, you know, in one of the towns like Farnham or whether it's one of the open spaces. So, you know, I really do want this to work together with the planning so that we retain and enhance, as we're supposed to do, our green spaces.
Thank you, Councillor Cohen. I think it's in the introduction, there's a reference to the various policies and other links. It does include planning, and there are references in the planning policies that deal with this aspect, albeit in not much detail. I think perhaps there's more benefit in referring on both sides, in the same way that there will be reference in the biodiversity policy to this policy and vice versa. But I think there is quite a lot already in existence. It's a case of actually making it stick. And I think that's an element that my new colleague in the planning department, Ian Brewster, who's replacing Andy Clout, is going to well, work on and work with. One element I think that's perhaps insufficiently addressed sometimes is the landscape design side of things, and that is that's not here my place to beef that up as far as the planning department is concerned, but it is an area that I think needs more recognition.
Come back very briefly. We had the old policy B3, which was very much to protect woodland, and the tree officers used to come out. And in fact, I was called out fairly recently to one where the inspector allowed it against your advice, it was you personally or one of the other tree officers' advice. And they built a house on this site, which was covered in trees, and then still didn't like it because, of course, their veranda was too close to trees. And I really had to hold myself back from saying, well, what did you think? You know, I mean, you know, we told you couldn't build on it because of all the trees, but the inspector allowed it. But it's in situations like that where we have a really tree-specific policy, and B3 is now in the neighbourhood plan as a different number, FMP 8. But, you know, it's got the same policy. So we do need to work together on that, because we do have these tree policies, the ones that are trying to protect trees in this particular area for a reason. And as you say, if we all work together on this and really beef up the protection, as well as the building and for the mitigation for the harm, then I think we can really see some progress.
I think the aspect of getting things addressed in the planning arena in particular is one that does also come down to case officers. And I think it's, from my own experience, 18 years ago in the planning department, there are times when trees aren't seen as important as some big leisure centre or such like. And that's then then the political or whatever other expedience is there might then bring down the level of importance as far as trees and landscape is concerned. And I think that that is something that both case officers as well as members need to pick up on. But again, I'm not here to comment on the planning side per se.
Thank you. I'll just make one comment and then I'll pass over. Obviously, we've just had the Environment Act 2021 passed about 10 days ago. I don't think we've fully understand the implications yet, but there are obviously implications on local authorities, planning, developers. I haven't seen a briefing sheet yet from planning on what does it actually mean, but it could have implications for us as a council and trees and everything else. I don't know enough to say what those implications are, but I think we just need to note that things like this may have to be adapted because of the legislation. Councillor Wojciechowski.
Oh, thank you, Chairman. You can learn a lot about a person, can't you, in an environment like this? So you've already discovered I have a passion for Cranny Leisure Centre, but I've also got a passion for trees. And I think they're equally important as far as I'm concerned. I think this is absolutely right. You really need to document in situ, but what you want to do is get it out there as well. Yes, there is a lot in existence, but how much of that do we actually know? I actually manage and have created my own woodland, so I know just how hard it is to look after and manage versus the planting, and it really does take a team of experts to get in there and manage it. So it is hard work. We have to be. I mean, when we look at No Mow May, which caused some controversy, although I was very much in favour of it, although there was issues around the management and there was lessons to be learned. But that can be very much the same in this case too, that we all go planting trees and then we do live happily ever after and hugging them, when in actual fact, you've got to look after them, and trees will get diseased, they will get, you know, squirrels, rabbits, all the rest of it eating around the bark and causing problems. But I think this is such an important environmental issue that we really should be doing all we can. And it really doesn't matter if we are one of the heaviest wooded areas in the south of England. I think where we can, we should add. And I think the planning part of it is a real issue. But I would like to think you've on item on page 12, page 180 in the agenda, you've got item 7, where Waverley Borough Council will engage with partners, public and landowners to raise awareness of the objectives. And I certainly think that is crucial for getting the message out there that we have to do what we can to make sure we look after the trees, plant the trees and keep them, because they are crucial to our environment and our biodiversity and to the future of the environment, in my opinion. And I'd also like to see us working with other agencies like the Woodland Trust, because for small, for like what I'm doing, I know I can apply for grants. And there's lots of other people perhaps in a very similar position to me, where there are other external forces, partners out there who we can all lean on and get information and get benefits from. So well done. I had to say all of this to make it worth your while sat there for so long. But as I say, I love trees as much as the leisure centre, so long may your policy evolve. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Else, Councillor Darcy, and then I'll bring it to a close because we've still got one agenda item. So if you can keep your points brief and if necessary, take some of them out. Councillor Else, you were first.
Thank you, Chairman. The thing that worries me more than anything here is on page 24. And I remember when I had the portfolio and you first told me about the oak processionary moth, it gave me a sleepless night. It is the most terrible thing, I think, and I think that this we must bear in mind. Tree pests and diseases present in the UK are likely to remain a greater threat to woodlands in the immediate future than the direct effects of climate change, and I think that says it all. So I think we need to be really mindful about this particular disease. I think it's probably the worst one because it's so dangerous to humans. And I would like to feel that that was going to have be of prime importance and be really, really properly considered. And I think every effort we possibly can make to control this, a risk-based approach is all very well, but we actually need to have a plan. And I don't see a plan here anywhere. I don't know what can be done, but we really do need, and I think that your job is going to be very difficult. Thank you.
Councillor Darcy, and then we'll sum up.
I won't go into any detail because I've sent Arno an email with all the points I was going to make. Just a couple of things I thought worth mentioning was he did mention hedgerows, and I just wanted to say that, you know, hedgerows are trees too, and that we shouldn't lose sight of the fact that in many cases where you couldn't plant trees because they'd be too big, you could plant a hedgerow, which has many of the benefits that trees do. The other thing was a couple of things that I think the biodiversity section could be beefed up because it's very brief compared to like pests and diseases sections about 4 or 5 pages, and then there's just like half a page on biodiversity. So standing deadwood, I think needs to be covered a bit more detail, and natural regeneration, which to me is the key because it's a very cheap way of creating woodland and also very effective. So I would like some more emphasis on natural regeneration and perhaps a little bit more of an ecological perspective for some of it, because it's clearly it's very directed at a certain aspect of tree management, but there is an important ecological aspect to it as well. Thanks. But it's a very nice report, by the way. Thanks, Arno.
Okay, I'm going to sum up because I'm conscious of the time. So thank you for your. If you're brief, Arno.
I can't do brief, apparently. Oak processionary moth is more of a human risk rather than a tree risk. And this is a tree document, but it is something that we recognize. We can't eradicate it. Forestry Commission has been unsuccessful to eradicate it. It's spreading. And I think we can only address it on a risk basis. There's no way we can even attempt getting rid of it out of Waverley. We can't do that with grey squirrels. We won't be able to do it with oak processionary moth either. I'll come back to grey squirrels with Councillor Darcy at some point.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to sum up on this because we're 9:45 and we've got another agenda item. We have recommendations which are, I haven't got the page number because I've got no page number, but the first page of agenda item 10, which is the feedback for the draft policy, and that the comments are taken into account. If we include that also for the comments submitted by Councillor Darcy in writing, to include that as well, because though we haven't discussed them, I think we would endorse that. Are members happy to support those recommendations? Great. So thank you, Arno, for your patience. Almost feels like the graveyard shift you've got for the last item.
It was worth it.
Fortunately, the last report is only a matter of a few pages, only about 6 or 8 pages. So, Annalise, if you'd like to, or Andrew to.
Thank you. Thanks for staying with us. This is the most exciting item on the agenda, as
Absolutely.
far as I'm concerned. So I'm sure you've all read the paper. The government's got a new preferred low-cost home ownership model, which is First Homes. This is your opportunity to pass any comments to the executive about the proposals of how we're going to implement First Homes. There were some flexibilities for local authorities, but generally, our expectation is we're talking about 20 homes a year. We're going to follow the national guidance, but we want to include a local connection. Thank you.
That is what you call a clear and succinct introduction. Kelvin, take note. Have we got any comments that we want to raise tonight? Councillor Coburn.
Well, I just really want to know if it's going to work.
Councillor Coburn, no.
Thank you. Could you be clearer?
I mean, I think when I shared this with the executive councillors, this is one of these zombie policies that some of you may remember starter homes, which was a very similar policy that the government brought out a few years ago. I don't think any have been built. The developers didn't want them. The housing associations didn't want them. Local authorities didn't want them. I don't think people wanted them. That's a zombie policy. This is a zombie policy. It will stagger around in a putrid, fetid way until it finally dies. You'll all know how passionate I'm about proper social housing, and this is just a pain in the neck.
Right, thank you for that. Any other questions? So I think what you're saying is it's a policy we should have, but actually isn't going to change the lives of the residents to any great extent.
Precisely, Chairman.
So I think that's the professional way. So if everybody's happy, we'll say the recommendations we support, but we understand the limitations that this policy will have on the health and well-being of our residents. So can I have people who agree with that policy? Right, I apologise for the lateness. I think this meeting could have been midnight had we not cut some of them. I think 242 pages is tested my resilience. It's tested my eyesight because I've had to bring my glasses going through the leisure centre report. It reinforces we cannot have this amount of items on the agenda. Now, I think these items were too big and we should give the respect to those reports tonight. In future, we will be cutting it far closer to the 9 o'clock. I think it would be unfair and it would be wrong to have tonight. But forewarning, Mark, next meeting, it gets to 9 o'clock and whatever item we're on, that will be the last item. And I'm sure members would agree with that stance. So thank you for your patience tonight. Thank you for your contribution, which I think has been excellent, and for the humour.